Welcome to Cosmic Sponge, the podcast where we look at UFOs and other weird and wild stuff in the world. I'm your host, Steven.
And I'm Jim, the other host.
Yeah, that's right. The co-host. We're both co-hosts. We've got a pretty good show planned for you today, I think. First of all, I'd like to say, if you're coming across this podcast, this is only our second episode, but please rate and review. That helps us in the standings and helps other people find the show. And another thing that we spoke about the last time we got together was we really want to start a conversation about unusual encounters, UFOs, Bigfoot, you name it. If you have had an encounter, email the show. Let us know what it is. You can describe it. We don't have to use your real name. Even though the two of us may disseminate some of the UFO stories and some of the things we plan to cover, we promise there'll be no judgment on your story. We'll just share it with the world. We really hope to hear from you soon. Jimmy, do we have the email address yet?
We don't, but it will be firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com.
Oh, okay. There you go. firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com.
So we're recording this before we actually get everything up and running. We're getting things up and running now, and when by the time we release this, everything will be ready, but we're working on the webpage. And the artwork I'm really excited about. I have this guy working on our cover art for the podcast. He's going to have 3 different looks for us, and hopefully Steve will like one of the 3. I sort of picked 2 of them, and I'm letting him decide the third one, the artist. And then we don't have to use them, but I think you'll like them.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing them for sure. Did you see anything this week in UFO or paranormal related?
I did. Did you want to do yours first, or do you want me to go first?
So what I ran into this week, which I found kind of interesting, this story was released on April 18th, and the Society of Catholic Scientists will hold its 2021 conference in Washington, D.C., on the subject of non-human intelligence. Kind of interesting. Now, they're not only going to be discussing extraterrestrials, they're also looking at AI and minds beyond human is how they relate to it. Now, they have some pretty prominent guests. There's going to be 13 talks. They have an astrophysicist, professor of astronomy from Harvard University, evolutionary paleobiologist, and some other dignitaries that'll be part of this conference that'll be speakers and discussing that, and I guess how a possible extra-human or non-human intelligence would fit into their doctrine, I suppose. Later on in the article, they do say, they're all Catholics, and, they're scientists as well as Catholics, and I think, they're trying to find ways to bridge that gap, because often Christianity is sort of opposed to science and vice versa. But I find that interesting considering how popular, how UFOs and the thought of extraterrestrials and a lot of that seems to have really hit the forefront here in the past couple of years, especially in the last year that this subject comes up. I find that interesting. I mean, what do you think?
Do you have the name of the did you say it was an astrophysicist? Or do you have that person's name? I love physicists. Those guys are cool.
He is Jonathan Lunine, director of Cornell Center for Astrophysics and Planetary Science.
Cornell, that's like a big school, right?
Yeah. So anyway, I mean, I think it's interesting timing. Let me just put it that way.
I wonder if do they do it every year? Is this the first one?
I think they've had conferences before. This is the first time they've talked about non-human intelligence, from what I gather. What you got for us this week?
So making the rounds this week is a story about the Navy. So apparently Jeremy Corbell came out with a video, documentary 2 years ago, something like that, about Bob Lazar. People in the UFO community really knows who he is. And I think he came out with another one about Skinwalker Ranch. I know he was talking about it, but I haven't checked to see whether or not he has that film out yet or not. Anyway, he revealed that someone leaked some Navy photos of UFOs over one of their ships. And I'm not sure exactly where this was located.
Oh, is this the video that looks green?
Yeah. The night vision goggle-looking video.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I just thought that was interesting. And the Navy apparently did confirm that it was a video taken by personnel on one of their naval ships.
Mm-hmm. That's all they're saying, though.
That's all they're pretty close-lipped about this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
For this week's topic, I thought that was pretty interesting, that Navy personnel are still seeing it. And this week we're doing another topic where we talk about Navy ships.
That's a nice segue right into our main topic this week is, of course, one of the Navy videos, the FLIR video that's all over YouTube. If you haven't seen it, I don't know how you haven't seen it, especially if you're interested in UFOs and other strange occurrences that we typically discuss. But go check it out on YouTube. There's 3 different videos that were leaked out from the Pentagon about 4 years ago now, 2017. Just in April 27th, the Navy came forward and said that FLIR, Go Fast, and Gimbal were all legitimate footage that were shot from Navy aircraft, and they are legitimately UFOs. As we've stated before, UFOs are real, and the Navy has confirmed that. And what we're going to talk about specifically is going to be the FLIR video, which was taken in 2004. It was part of the Nimitz Encounter. And Jimmy, I know you've done most of the legwork on this one, so why don't you start us off? What's the first part of this story?
Well, before I get started, anybody out there who hears this story and has corrections or firsthand knowledge and can help us clear up any misinformation we might unintentionally get out there, definitely contact us. We'd love to hear from you. So our story starts in November of 2004. On November 10th, 11th Strike Group, Carrier Group, which comprised of the Nimitz and a handful of other ships, one of which is the Princeton, the USS Princeton, which was a cruiser. Is a cruiser, still out there, still serving our country. It had the Spy 1 Aegis radar system on it, and behind that was Senior Chief Petty Officer Kevin Day. Now, Kevin Day had 18 years of experience at this point. He had noticed and started picking up tracks coming off the radar that were unusual, and they started north of where they were. So the Carrier Group was conducting their exercises southwest off the coast of San Diego in the Pacific. They were about 100 miles south of San Clemente Island and about 80 miles off the coast. And up at San Clemente Islands, now if you get out a map, you can see it. It's just south of Los Angeles, about 60 miles. He would pick up these tracks that were coming in groups of 5 to 10. And they were coming down from above 28,000 feet and stopping and then floating south. And he describes them on his display as like snowflakes floating down south. And what was odd about them, they didn't have any indication of normal craft that he would pick up on his radar. The first thing was they were only traveling at about 100 knots at 28,000 feet. At that height and at that speed, an aircraft would fall out of the air.
Right.
So,
at that altitude, that's very slow for anything flying near 30,000 feet. Typically, you would be flying because the air is so thin. Usually only jet aircraft travel at that altitude. You can't go slow. You got to be moving through there. You got to have some thrust pushing you through the atmosphere at that altitude.
Yeah, so the first thing that would come to mind, something flying at that speed, at that altitude, is balloons. What's odd were they were dropping out from above 28,000 feet and then floating to the south, and then he would lose them around Guadalupe Island, about 260 miles, 250 miles south of San Clemente Islands.
Now, how many of these tracks did you say? So that's like he's picking up these anomalies on his radar screen, and how many more was it that were up at 28,000 and floating down and moving south at the same time, very slowly?
Well, in the interviews I saw with him, he said that about 5 tracks is what he picked up the very first time that he saw them. But he would also pick them up in groups of 5 to 10, up to 50 tracks by the time November 14th, which is where our pilots will enter the story. So about 50 tracks over the course of 4 days is what he picked up. And what made them unusual, because at first you think, okay, some kind of weird balloon or something like that, coming in. Maybe that's what it is. But they would also drop from 28,000 feet to 50 feet above sea level, a snap of the fingers, really fast, which was incredibly unusual. So the first thing Kevin thought was maybe there's a problem with the system. They basically did turn it off and turn it back on again.
Rebooted it.
Right, rebooted it. They also had a tech come in to review the system and to make sure that everything was working correctly. And when they boot it back up, make sure there were no problems in the boot up procedure.
Yeah, and just real quick, anything that would be at 28,000 feet, anything sizable, and it dropped to 50 feet in a matter of seconds would create multiple sonic booms through our atmosphere. It would just be boom, 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 boom if it dropped that quickly. From what I understand, there was no indication of any kind of sonic booms. No one heard anything.
That's correct. No sound at all came from these from anywhere in the battle group. To the best of my knowledge, I haven't seen any indication of it in all of the interviews I've watched.
That's something we've seen with other UFO sightings. When they zip off, almost every encounter, the encounter ends by the UFO zipping off over the horizon, whether they're in the air and they are visually seeing it, or the observers on the ground, they're almost always zip off and there's no sonic boom, no sound at all, which is very, very strange. Anyway, so what happened? And this was over the course of a few days that they were seeing all these unusual tracks?
Yeah, so this is maybe the first thing I'm unclear about, and I wasn't able to find anything that cleared it up for me, because there's been reporting from multiple people on both the Princeton and the Nimitz that indicate it was 4 days, and then others said it was maybe up to 2 weeks, which I find unusual, that they're not able to nail down exactly what that time frame is, but was a long time ago. And most of these people came out well after the event, are recollecting something that happened 9 to 15 years beforehand. So whether it was 2 weeks prior to the Super Hornets being redirected to check out one of these radar tracks, or whether it was 4 days, I haven't been able to find out precisely, when they first picked these up. But Kevin always, at least in every interview I've seen him in, said it was November 10th that he picked up the tracks initially.
So this sounds like about 4 days, because didn't the incident happen on November 14th?
That's right, November 14th. So they continued to track these anomalies on the radar for 4 days. Now, you have to understand that while these guys are out there, time is money, and they're doing a lot of combat training and preparing for their deployment. They were well enough out of the way, and he hadn't identified them yet, that they really didn't become a concern. It wasn't until November 14th that Kevin Day brought it up to the captain of the Princeton and said, we're going to have jets out in this area doing maneuvers. We really probably should take a look, get eyes on one of these tracks to make sure it's nothing that's going to interfere with the training and we're not going to have any accidents. The captain agreed, and it was at that point that some of the jets had already taken off. The very first exercise for the day included 2 F-18Cs, which is a single-seater, and they were being run by the Marines. So they were the Red Devils, and they were going to set up at a cap point about 100 miles south of the Nimitz. And that's where they would start. They were going to play the aggressors.
Now, the cap point is the what?
Combat Air Patrol is what they call it. And it's essentially the point where you're going to start your exercise. And in this particular exercise for the day, the Marines were going to play the aggressors and start out with their F-18Cs 100 miles south of the Nimitz. And then the Super Hornets, which were the Black Aces, were going to play the defenders. And they were going to start off 40 miles south of the Nimitz for their exercise. Already in the air, they had a E-2 Hawkeye, which is a plane that is a support plane, and it's like air traffic control in the air. And
quickly, in case listeners aren't aware of what a Hawkeye looks like, it's a twin-engine turboprop aircraft. You've maybe even seen one of these or one similar to it. They're sometimes called an AWACS plane. And what they have is this huge disc on the top of it that rotates on the very top of the fuselage. And what that's doing is giving from the air, it's a down-looking radar and down-looking sensor so that you can see all the way to the ground. Because if you're got ground-based radar or you have ship-based radar, something could be actually flying very, very close to the surface of the water. That's where the term "flying under the radar" comes from. That's one thing that the Hawkeye does, is it observes everything in the area all the way down to the surface of the water or down to the ground.
At this point, the E-2 comes into the story because Kevin Day contacts the commander on the E-2 and says, we want to take a look at this track we have, and what we want to do is go ahead and redirect one of the Red Devils that's already in the air. So they redirect a Douglas Kurth, who is in one of those planes, over to check out what's going on. On his way over there, while he's headed over to investigate, 2 Super Hornets took off that were playing the defenders. The first of which was commanded by Commander David Fravor. Now, he had just taken over the Black Aces in October, the month before. And with him, he had a brand new pilot, a junior pilot, as a wingman. Now, these are F-18, they're the 2-seater Super Hornets. At the time, it was the brand new plane. And they have quite a bit more fuel. I think the F-18Cs are 1/3 the fuel capacity.
Yeah, the Super Hornet, they have a pilot, and their primary responsibility is, of course, flying the airplane. Then they have someone in the back seat or the second seat known as a WISO, which is the Weapons Specialist Officer. And they are responsible for acquiring targets, operating everything else. In fact, oddly enough, sometimes a WISO can actually be in command of the whole operation. But they're the ones typically that operate the weapon systems. And that way it takes all the pressure off the pilot. And especially an attack aircraft like an FA-18 Hornet, which that's what the F is fighter, A is attack, is what that designation stands for. And that means that it's a multi-role aircraft, that it can be a fighter or it can go attack ground targets and that sort of thing. So, and it's very sophisticated, especially in 2004. It was a very sophisticated aircraft.
Yeah, top of the line, right, in 2004.
Yes, absolutely a frontline attack fighter.
So 2 of those had just taken off from the Nimitz while Douglas Kurth was headed over to take a look and see what he could see of the targets. Well, given the fuel situation, they decided to redirect Douglas Kurth back to his cap point 100 miles south and instead have the Super Hornets go over and take a look. So Douglas was already in the vicinity, so he's like, well, this is interesting. Let me just take a quick peek. He flew over the area, and he noticed a bit of white water below him. Now, it was a clear day, clear sky, no white caps on the ocean surface. So it stood out, the white caps. And he said it was pretty large and reminded him of maybe a submerging or maybe some large ship or something sinking. That was sort of the sense he got from it.
Yeah, I know the description's been like the water was churning.
Yeah, so he took a quick look and then headed on down to his cap point as the Super Hornets were arriving. Now, the Super Hornets, after taking off from the Nimitz and on their way to their cap point, they get a call from Kevin Day. He had initially called the E-2 because he was going to have the E-2 take over and send the Super Hornets over. But the E-2 were having trouble locating the target on their radars. They weren't able to pick up the target at all, I think.
Yeah, and from what I understand, now, the F-18 Hornets also have onboard radar, and never once were they able to pick up the targets on their radar either. And it was actually the Princeton with this new sophisticated Aegis system that was the one tracking these targets to start with. And didn't they have to direct favor there themselves?
That's right. So on duty that day, Kevin Day was there as a supervisor. The air controller who was on duty had 12 years of experience. His name hasn't been released. But Kevin Day was right behind him, giving instructions as well. So he was in the combat control room giving instructions to David Fravor. Now, in David Fravor's plane, there's David Fravor piloting the F-18, and then behind him is his Wizzo, which is Jim Slate, both of which have come out. And I think the only time I was able to find any time that Jim Slate has come on the record to talk about it was a very short Fox News program segment where they interviewed the both of them.
Some are still active duty. I know the other plane pilot is still active duty. So, they want to be kind of careful about what they say and all that sort of stuff. And then I also think that Wizzo said he didn't really want to be a UFO guy.
That's right.
Like he didn't want to be like every time there's a UFO show, a bunch of people showing up wanting to interview him, so.
Yeah.
Apparently David Fravor doesn't care because I've seen him plenty.
Yeah, he's been on a lot. You can find his story just about anywhere.
Yeah, that's right. So, it's a great story. I like it.
Love it. And he seems a no-nonsense kind of guy, right? So they head over to the location, and they're flying over it, and they get merge plot. Now, this is where the radar cells can't distinguish between the target and the F-18s. which means you either use the onboard radar of your jet, which I found out wasn't very good on those jets at that time because they were still using an old system that got swapped out before they went and were deployed. So that was interesting. And it wasn't really meant to pick up these targets in the same way the Princeton is. So the Princeton led them in. They get merge plot. They look out, and they're trying to see what's going on, see if they can see this target anywhere. And they look down, and they see the churning water that Douglas Kurth had seen. And now it resembled a cross, according to David Fravor. He was thinking maybe a Boeing 747. I think he said a 737. 737, right.
And they thought maybe a plane had just went down.
Right.
And the churning water, he said it looked to be about as long as the fuselage of a commercial airliner, like a 737.
As they were looking down, both him and his Wizzo about at the same time are like, what the heck is that? And they notice a little object, and they estimated it was, and I don't know how they go about estimating this. I guess experience. They're at 28,000 feet. They witness this little thing that's bouncing around like a ping pong ball, is the way they describe it, just erratically moving north, south, east, west. And it looks like a tic-tac. So they have no rotor wash. So the first thing he thinks, well, maybe it's a helicopter. No rotor wash. And at 28,000 feet, I guess he can see rotor wash at 28,000 feet. I mean, I've never really been in a fighter jet at 28,000 feet looking down, and I don't have experience, but this guy's been doing this for years. He's a commander, you know. So this is what he sees, and he's like, well, that's unusual. What is that? And he says, let's get a closer look. So he has his wingman stay up top. Him and his Wizzo head down. Not that his Wizzo has a choice, right? So so he decides to go and head on down in a slow descent. He's at, about 20,000 feet, I think is what they came in at, not 28,000 feet. So just correct that. They're at 28,000 feet coming in. They notice the churning water. David says, all right, I'm going to head down and see what's going on. Now, he doesn't start a steep descent. Some people say, well, why didn't he just dive in real fast? Well, apparently it's really easy when you don't have any way to really easily determine distance with your eyeballs. They get in an unrecoverable position if you go down too fast, because the ocean looks the same at 2,000 feet as it does at 20,000 feet. So he's playing it safe. They're not in a combat situation. He's just going to go take a look. So he starts his descent, and he gets down, 2,000 or 3,000 feet, and all of a sudden this thing apparently notices that he's heading down toward it, because it realigns itself so that the long part is pointing up, and it starts to ascend up towards him. David's coming down in a spiral, and the tic-tac is coming up in a spiral, and they're opposite of each other. And Commander Fravor describes this as they're opposite of each other on a clock, him spiraling down, the tic-tac spiraling up. And about halfway up, he's like, all right, let's get a little bit closer to this. So he decides to cut across the clock face. So if we're looking at a clock, he's like at the 9 o'clock position and decides to cut across at the 3 o'clock position and get in front of this thing, get really close to it. He gets within a half mile of it. Now, at a half a mile, you're pretty darn close in the air. And all of a sudden, this thing accelerates, and then bam, it's gone. Like almost immediately. Gone as in, it isn't like leaving the area and he can see it go away really far, really fast. It's like across his bow and disappears. That's how fast it's moving. So him and his wingmen are pretty wigged out at this point.
And I know one little thing I'd like to point out is on their way there, they were asked what their ordnance was, their loadout was. And of course, they had dummy missiles, right? Because it was a training exercise.
Yeah, they had Cap-9s.
And they were already kind of like, why are they asking us what our loadout is, And that was the first thing that I remember, and I wish I'd have mentioned that a little earlier, but, that was the first indication that they were asked to check out a real life thing, but then ask what they were armed with. But anyway, describing the object, they said it looked like a white tic-tac. It was about 40 feet long, they estimated. Okay, there's all this churning water. It's zipping around, and they said that when it zipped from corner to corner and just kept moving very erratically, zipping around, that it didn't change its orientation. In other words, it was facing a certain direction, but it would go backwards, forwards, sideways, and everything else without turning the way an aircraft would. It didn't bank or anything. It was just zipping around, as if that there was, no indication that it made any kind of normal movement that would be associated with any kind of aircraft that we are familiar with. When he began to dive on this object, it obviously reacted to him. So that, of course, indicates some type of intelligent control, whether it's remote or had some type of onboard intelligences, or the thing itself is some type of intelligence. We don't know, of course. We don't know what the object is, but it did react to him, which is a very important point. Basically, the Tic Tac was matching his maneuvers. And then, just as Jimmy said, when he decided to get a closer look, he dove slightly to cut across. And if you're familiar with fighter pilot tactics, you dive, you gain airspeed. And when he did that, he did kind of get in behind it for a moment, but then it zipped and disappeared. And then it reappeared at their cap point. They were told that it reappeared at their cap point like just moments later, an impossible distance away.
Yeah, so they're about 60 miles at this point away from their cap point. So it traveled 60 miles in approximately 30 seconds based on their recollection. Also, right before, I guess they got there, maybe even before Douglas Kurth had gotten there, Kevin Day had seen it drop from 28,000 feet down to 50 feet above sea level. Apparently, the radar system keeps track of all that data. So Kevin, the next day, was able to go back and look at it, and the calculations came out to it traveled that distance in 0.78 seconds. So this is what you're talking about, the multiple sonic booms. They heard none of it. No one heard that at that point. Nobody. So
we had that happen. But one question I have for you is, where did the FLIR video come from? They did not video this. Is that correct?
That's right. He did not have a FLIR pod. It's called FLIR, which is forward-looking infrared radar. And so he didn't have one of those pods. It's made by Raytheon Corporation on his...
Nice detail there.
Yeah, on his jet.
Are you a spokesman for Raytheon?
No, I just found it interesting because when we get to the video, that actually plays into the video a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, no, he didn't have it on there. They looked and they're like, well, okay, that was weird. Let's make the most of it. We're out here, so let's go ahead back to our cap point. And as he turned to head back to his cap point, Princeton comes back on, and Kevin Day says, "You're not going to believe this, sir, but that object, it just showed up at your cap point."
And that is another thing about it. That indicates there was some kind of monitoring of their communication, monitoring of what they're doing. How did it turn up at their cap point?
Yeah.
It just seems that would be something that just is not common knowledge to anyone other than people actively involved in that exercise.
Right. And something I couldn't find out after that is where did it go from there? Because Commander Fravor and the Red Devils, they went ahead with their training mission that morning before heading back to the Nimitz.
When did the aircraft that was equipped with the FLIR unit, when was it launched? When did it encounter the object?
David and his crew, they finished their training. They head back to the Nimitz and land. And as he's down in the room where they're swapping out their gear and the other guys are getting their gear on to go up for their training mission, that's when he makes a mention to one of the other pilots there. It says, "You're not going to believe what I saw up there." And he says, "Well, we know. Everybody, knows because we heard you on the thing." And apparently these things spread. The rumors on Navy ships apparently spread like snapping your fingers. It's all over the place.
Now, I watched this short video. I think it's called the Nimitz Encounter. It's only about 30 minutes long. It's on Amazon right now. I think who you're talking about, the petty officer, David, he's on it. And also 3 other enlisted men came forward as well. One of them made the comment that he heard over, and, they got it on the loudspeakers, all the communication, and they heard, apparently he was hollering, "Hey, we're engaged," and was pretty excited when the object was reacting to him.
That's one of the interviews you can find on Betty's website. He's got a YouTube channel, and we'll give some information about where you guys can go and find all the interviews he has of the people on the Nimitz.
There's a ton of stuff here. We can't cover it all in the time period that we have, but we want to cover the important details and the important caveats. So once they returned, another
pilot, Chad Underwood, who's the Wizzo in one of the next 2 planes that are going up, he's like, hey, we're going to catch this thing. We're going to get some information on it. Now, the jet he goes up also in a Super Hornet, but this time their jet is outfitted with a Atfleer pod. And this is where the video comes from.
Manufactured by the Raytheon Corporation.
That's right.
Don't forget to leave that out. We'll lose our corporate sponsorship.
That's right. Call me, Raytheon. So Chad gets up and he actually gets one of these things on the Atfleer. Now, he doesn't see it with his eyes. This is interesting because those things have a heck of a range. He's just within 20 miles where he gets the connection and is able to lock onto it. And it's a passive lock. So basically, it's sort of following it best as it can. He tries to get a regular lock, and I don't know what they call that, active lock onto it, but it apparently exhibited radar blocking action.
Some type of, it was doing something to jam the radar, because you can tell the way he's trying to connect to it when you watch the video. The two little vertical lines that are surrounding the object, and if he gets a lock, it's going to come all the way into it, but he keeps bouncing in and out because he's actively trying to get a radar lock on it, and it just won't hold. And I've seen some experts interviewed about that video, and they say that's because it was, or I actually think that pilot or that Wizzo was being interviewed, and he said that it was actively blocking him trying to do a lock on it.
Yeah, and I'd like to get more information on that. Based on what I could find out, the software and hardware in the Super Hornets at that time could ascertain whether or not it was actively attempting to block, and that's what he was getting indications from this target he's trying to hit. It's actively trying to block him, electronic warfare. And they said it's an act of war to actively block naval. So something to keep in mind, right?
UFOs have been around for a long time, and they're obviously on some mysterious mission that we have no idea what it is. And they've never proved to be outright hostile. I mean, as far as we know, there may be some type of top secret thing out there that the Pentagon knows about that we don't, and the average people know about. Everything I've ever heard is they kind of have their own agenda and don't seem that concerned about us. They react to our military from time to time. They obviously hover around our military bases, our very top secret places, and have some fun shutting down nuclear missile silos and things like that from time to time, but have never proven overtly hostile as far as shooting down aircraft or anything like that. Now, I did see something. It may have been on that UFO show that Luis Alonso's on now. What's that called? Unidentified or something?
Unidentified, yeah.
And it seems like they were talking to the Italian government, and they claimed that one of them shot a beam of light and destroyed a helicopter of theirs.
Right.
Who knows? Maybe if you get overtly aggressive with them, then maybe they will react. I don't know. Anyway, so let's get back to the Nimitz case. So they get this video. I know on YouTube it only lasts 1 minute and 16 seconds. Did they say how long they actually, because I know at the end of the video it just zips off to the side, it leaves the frame on the left side. It looks like it zooms away very quickly. Of course, I have heard some skeptics say that's because they changed to a 2X view or something like that, and it was its normal movement. I don't know that enough about those systems to be able to recognize that or not. I don't know. There's been plenty of experts that have watched the video and said this looks legit. It looks like it zoomed away, but then you're always going to have skeptics and naysayers.
Yeah. So Chad Underwood, who shot the video, said he can't say for sure whether or not it was a case where the jet just turned or the pod just turned, and it appears as if the object moved off the thing, or whether it was, the pod losing track and the jet turning that made it appear as if it were going
right. And that's something I've heard the experts say, and I'm going to concur with that, just because maybe it did zoom away. But if even the guy shooting the video, who's an expert in using these systems, is saying, hey, I may have just lost a track, then that's good enough for me. I really hate it when some of the UFO people they'll see something like that and just go nuts and be like, do you see the way it zoomed off frame? And they won't even take any kind of consideration that that's not what it was doing, that it was actually just something with the system, something simple. Of course, that's one reason, again, we're motivated to start this podcast, because there's too many podcasts that just drink the Kool-Aid and want to believe everything and that's out there. I want to try and disseminate some of that and get to the truth or as close as we can, about the truth about UFOs and other mysteries without going to underground bases and, shooting aliens in the head and just, some of the extravagant claims I just don't believe are true. But anyway, back to the Nimitz case.
Back to the Nimitz case.
Did they say how long they actually tracked it? Because like I said, the video is only 1 minute and 17 seconds.
Okay, so this gets really interesting because there's more questions that came up than answers for me after diving into it a little bit. So there are two personnel that have come forward on the naval ships that indicate that it was more than 2 minutes and 40-some seconds, I think was the size of the video file. And that's the one that's been released on the web. Now, according to David Fravor, that's all there is. That is the length of the tape. According to the other two people on the tape, no, it's quite a bit more than that, up to 10 minutes maybe. One thing I found was very, very interesting is that apparently in the Super Hornets, they have a tape that you can turn the tape on or off on the and record the at-flare information. I think what had happened, at least this is a theory, but based on what I've heard, they also have a live feed recording on the Princeton of that at-flare information that goes on. Mm-hmm. So I would guess that if both statements are true, that there is video footage that's being recorded on the Princeton that's 10 minutes long, and then on the plane, the tape on the plane is only like 2 minutes 45 seconds. So maybe they initiated the recording beforehand on the Princeton, but Underwood initiated his recording later. And I would like somebody to maybe, that's a theory. So if somebody out there can tell me how those systems work, and if that's something that could have happened, that would validate both points of view from the people on the Princeton, the two seamen on the Princeton, and then the pilot in the plane.
So let's get to some interesting weirdness about some of this. So we have Fravor's testimony, or his recounting of the encounter of this Tic Tac object, about 40 feet long, featureless, white, shaped like a Tic Tac. Later, another plane goes up and captures the video that we've seen. There's been several people that says the enlisted men on the Princeton said that some civilians showed up, as well as an Air Force. Is that right? An Air Force officer showed up on their ship and erased all their data, or took all their data from all the radar data, and then also made them sign non-disclosure agreements. Have you heard anything about that? Has that been corroborated with more than one witness?
Yes. Okay. So there are several people involved with this. Let's start with P.J. Hughes. Now, P.J. Hughes was responsible for offloading the data from the E-2 Hawkeye, which apparently had some information on the encounter and other information. There's secondhand information that indicates that they also had a close-up view of the Tic Tac, eyeballs on, right off of their wing. They saw it through the windows on the Hawkeye. Now, I didn't know the Hawkeye had windows, but apparently it does.
You can see out of it to fly it, from what I understand.
Well, off the wing, off the side of the plane.
Yeah, I mean, it's a turboprop. I would have to actually pull a picture up of one to see if it had a window. I'm sure it's got small windows on the side.
Yeah, so P.J. Hughes says, yes, the person that they're naming Roger was somebody who was in the E-2 Hawkeye at the time. Yeah, everybody in the Hawkeye saw this thing with their eyes, according to him. But that guy hasn't come on the record, so that's secondhand account. P.J. Hughes, however, has. And apparently his job is those data recorders. They're just hard drives. They call them bricks. They're hard drives encased in this thing that basically looks like a brick. And he takes them out, and he's responsible for chain of command for those things. And he takes them from the Hawkeye down to his shop, which was just below, I guess, the command center that's above. He's below deck, right below that. He takes them down there, and he says he believes it's probably about 30 minutes, no more than that. Within 30 minutes, his commanding officer shows up with two other individuals in flight suits. And he believes they were Air Force flight suits, not naval flight suits. So his commanding officer says, don't record, this pickup on the logs, and took the bricks. Now, it's at this point that Gary Voorhees on the Princeton, he's in charge of the data recorders for the Aegis system. He, shortly after that, apparently gets a visit from, we're going to assume, the same two individuals. He's told to give up the data bricks for his logs and anything else that's in the shop to erase it. and they leave with those data logs. And there's another person who came forward who said that he operated he was there to train the people on board the Nimitz, or on board the Princeton, that were handling the helicopter offloading and unloading for the Princeton. So the Princeton apparently has 2 helicopters on board. They usually keep one helicopter in the bay while the other helicopter is out and about doing its activities. And mostly, my understanding is that it primarily does anti-sub maneuvers is what that helicopter is primarily used for, and then maybe recovery and that kind of thing. But he said, yeah, they actually had people, and it wasn't unusual being that close to shore, while they're doing training exercise, they would have people come and go from offshore. 2 people did show up. They were wearing regular flight suits, not, according to him, regular flight suits that they had available for anyone who was going to be flying on the helicopters. But underneath them, they had Air Force uniforms on. It seems that there's multiple people said, yes, there were 2 Air Force guys who did come and did get the data off of the Princeton and the Nimitz and the E2 Hawkeye data and take off with it.
You got to wonder how they got there so quickly to get all this information. And there must be some type of protocol when you get up to those upper echelon ranks like captain, where you're in command. They must be required to report this somewhere. I mean, how else would they have known about it, showed up and said, I need all this data, and then disappear with it, right? I mean, what do you think? I mean, I just think there must be a protocol when you get to a certain rank in the military. I mean, they probably don't go into a lot of detail and say UFOs are real or anything like that. They probably just say, if you encounter unidentified aerial phenomena, I think is what they call them. And the Navy calls them something different, unidentified aerial vehicles, I think, UAVs. Yeah. It sounds to me like if they encounter these things, they have to contact the Pentagon or contact someone in the chain of command that gets the Pentagon involved, because these people show up time and time again way too quickly to say, we need your data, right? And they cover it up.
Well, okay, so
are you saying you don't believe that happened?
Okay, we're getting into speculation here. Okay, first of all, there are too many unknowns for me.
There's a lot of unknowns. I agree. Yeah. I'm speculating. You're absolutely right. I mean, I didn't see any of it. For that matter. But I mean, we do have the video, but I think it's important to point out that the video that we have shows a pretty benign object that's very far away and pretty blurry, not a lot of detail to it. I mean, it does look like an oval shape, but maybe that's a normal aircraft being viewed from behind or something. We don't know. I don't know enough about those systems to interpret the data. But the Navy did say, they specifically said, in fact, this is in my notes for this episode, the Navy admits it has more video, but that it would gravely damage national security to release more videos and other documentations. So it's easier to say there are UAP or UAVs than to release more information that could uncover top secret information that we don't want our enemies knowing about. I mean, that's what they're saying, because they don't want to release some things because they say we can't reveal how we made this video, or we found this because it's a top secret type of detection equipment or something like that. That's what they always fall back on.
Yeah, so there's a lot here, and I don't know how much we can get through.
Well, I mean, we've already been at it for a while, so.
Yeah. So let's tackle just a few of the issues we have with this.
So let's see what we have. So we have the multiple radar images, right?
The story doesn't stop on November 7th.
Oh.
It actually goes on. So apparently, according to several of the people, including Kevin Day, there were multiple contacts with other pilots, up to 6 other pilots, over the course of the remainder of the training. Over the next week or so, the pilots knew these things were out there. And, pilots, apparently, when they know something's out there, they want to get an eyeballs on it, check it out, look at it. So they would be flying around in the area where Kevin was picking these up, and the same thing would happen. Anytime a jet would approach, these things would drop from 28,000 feet down to sea level. And then as soon as the jets left, they would pop back up to 28,000 feet and continue going down to Guadalupe Island and go off the radar track at that point.
On their little mysterious mission that we have no idea what it's about.
Exactly.
Any of those pilots come forward, been interviewed or anything?
Nope, not that I've seen, no. Now, Kevin is like, okay, I can't identify this thing. I'm seeing these things on the Aegis system. The next day or the day after that, he finds one of these that are close to the ship, and then he goes up to the big eyes. Now, the big eyes are these huge binoculars that are mounted to the deck of the ship. So he goes up there, finds the bearing where this thing is supposedly going to be hanging out, and he's able to see a light in the sky. Now, he acknowledges that it's unextraordinary from looking at it at the big eyes. It just proved to him that there was something out there, that he could see something out there, a light at that location. And he wasn't the only one. Apparently several other people who have come forward said, yeah, they could view these things through the big eyes at night. They would just sit there and check them out.
Interesting.
Right.
Any other pertinent information before we start?
One other thing. There was one episode of Unidentified, and it's a great show. I think it's a lot of fun to watch it. They repeat stuff a lot, so they sort of draw it out over the course of the season, but it's a fun show to watch. And they actually, Lou Elizondo, who was the head of the ATIP program.
We'll get into ATIP another time.
Another time, because it's a whole other story we could probably do several episodes on. They actually go down to the Guadalupe Islands to see if they saw anything down there. And, some interesting stories came out of that.
Yeah, some of the fishermen, some of the locals talked about some things they had seen as well. Yeah, it's a good show. It's on the History Channel. Be sure and check it out.
Yeah. And another thing worth mentioning, too, before we go on, is that apparently there were no sonar contacts by the Louisville, because there was some talk about them getting sonar hits or something like that. But that apparently, based on everything I've seen, is not true.
Okay.
So nothing underwater, no unidentified submersible objects.
No USOs.
No USOs, as far as we know.
All right, so let's break it down. Let's see what we've got. We've got mostly for 3 or 4 days, we have all these multiple radar images that are 28,000 feet and will drop all the way to 50 feet above the water. No sonic booms, no anything. Unidentified. And another thing that we left out, they're not following any kind of normal commercial flight path or anything like that. They're in an unusual location. David Fravor's group goes to check it out, and there's another Marine pilot that sees it briefly before that and sees the water churning, witnesses that part, but then David Fravor and his Wizzo and the other plane pilot and Wizzo witnessed the actual tic-tac object that was zipping around erratically above the churning water that was about 40 feet long, featureless, white, looked like a tic-tac, and the churning water was about the size of an airplane fuselage commercial jet. They had their encounter. It had reacted to him. They seemed to feel like they'd engaged with it. And then finally, after just a few moments, it just zipped away and showed up their cap point. Later, another plane recorded an object which they believe was the same object or an object like that. But that plane didn't actually have eyes on the object.
It was just under 20 miles away, so they couldn't see it with their
We're
eyeballs.
not 100% sure that what the video shows is what David Fravor saw. That's one thing, too. And I doubt that even the guys from that plane could acknowledge that either.
My understanding on the follow-up to that is that there were no other craft in the air, and they were going off of radar hits coming off of the Princeton of something that was behaving in a similar way as the objects before. So they're fairly sure.
Now, another interesting thing that I heard about the data they had on board the Princeton was the video apparently was a lot higher definition than what we have been left with.
Two of them, Jason Turner and Gary Voorhis.
Yeah, they said they both saw the video of it, and it looked a whole lot higher definition. They said they could actually make out some type of protrusions on the bottom of the craft. So when you watch, there's been some animation, of course, computer animation of the encounter. I forget who's done it, but just about every documentary's used the same videos. And they'll show 2 little hooks kind of on the bottom of the object. And that's why, because of that eyewitness testimony of seeing a couple of small protrusions on an otherwise featureless object.
Yeah, and both of those witnesses claim to have seen, far more than 2 minutes of the video.
It's supposed to be about 10 minutes long from what I understand.
Right, yeah.
So we have that. Then we have apparently what most people believe was the Air Force showing up and confiscating all the radar data, whisking it away, as they often do.
As they often do.
What do you make of this thing, man?
It is the thing that got me back into UFOs after, 20, 30 years, whatever, because when I was in my mid-20s, I pretty much became a huge skeptic, the engineer's mind, I guess. Like Roswell, for example, we'll get into that at some point, but there was a completely believable explanation for that makes a whole lot of sense to me. That's mundane. It's not out of this world kind of thing. And that was the big thing back in the day was Roswell.
Roswell, and the abductions were big back when I was kind of into it. Those two things was what everybody talked about. And of course,
and there were good explanations for those, for me, that satisfied my curiosity. But the Nimitz?
Yeah, the Nimitz is quite interesting. The biggest thing for me, and what I think's odd in a way that more people haven't taken notice, is the Navy admitted UFOs are real in April of 2020. I mean, the videos have been floating around out there for a while, but then, there's the two other videos, Gimbal and Go Fast, and they come out and said, yeah, we don't know what they are. Now, are they saying that they're extraterrestrial craft or anything like that? No, of course they're not saying anything like that. I'm not saying anything like that. But based on Fravor's testimony, and I do know the other pilot, I believe, was interviewed, but it's female, and she won't actually reveal her because she's still active military. So, but of course, everybody would know who she was. It wouldn't be too. If you were in the military, everybody would know. I mean, if you were her commanding officer, you obviously would know who she is. But at any rate, she's allegedly. I mean, we don't know for sure because she hasn't publicly come forward. But we do have his testimony, a Navy pilot. I mean, what would be his motivation for making it up?
Yeah, we have his testimony and her testimony. She just didn't, show her face, and that was
it's her testimony because she didn't come forward. And for all we know, the producers of the History Channel just drummed up some lady and had her.
I'm fairly sure they didn't, but
I'm fairly sure they didn't too. But again, you can't 100% say that was her unless that person comes forward. I mean, I believe it's probably true too, but
here's where I come away with it. I'm in the Lou Elizondo camp. Now, he has access to more data than I have. And I have to sort of take his word for it because he says, when you look at all the facts, when you have access to all the data, and that's the problem he has with people out there who are skeptics. And probably the number one skeptic out there for the video footage, at least, is Mick West. And he's got a really good site. He's an engineer. He's a skeptic. Love his work. You should go check it out. But you can go Mick West on YouTube.
Yeah, he pretty much said, I don't know what the object was that David Fravor saw, but it's not what's in that video. Right, because he says it doesn't behave at all like he said it did in the video, and that's fair. That's a fair point.
Yep.
I mean, I agree with that too. But the one thing that always annoys me about skeptics. Okay, now I mean, when I'm looking at a case like this or any UFO case, I immediately go to the skeptics as well. I got to hear their side of the story, and quite often, you hear it and you're kind of like, yeah, I see that. But they always say. They'll say, I don't know what it is, but it could possibly be the exhaust of a jet traveling in the opposite direction.
Which is what Mick does.
And then they say this. They say, I don't know that's what it is, but that's far more likely than an intergalactic spaceship or whatever. And they always want you to compare it. And then you're like, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, I get it. Yeah, it would be more likely. You know what I mean? Just because, yes, it may be more likely that it would be something mundane, it doesn't mean that it is. And I mean, I get where skeptics come from by saying that.
I'm one of those skeptics.
I know, but I mean, it could very well be that. But just because, I mean, it doesn't matter what they see, they'll always fall back on that it's probably this, it's probably a hoax, because that's more likely than a true, UFO or flying saucer. And
well, that's weird because I'm a skeptic like that, but I come away with it with it's more likely to be an intergalactic spacecraft based on all the information that's been presented. Assume you take that information as accurate.
Yeah. Well, I'm not even sure UFOs are intergalactic spacecraft. I mean, or, interplanetary or whatever.
Oh, yeah, that's maybe going too far, but I would say not of this Earth.
Not, yeah, you sound like Jesse Marcel. Is not of this Earth.
Not of this Earth.
But anyway, yeah, I don't know where they're from. I mean, there's some issues I read, or I'm in the process. I'm actually reading a couple of books right now And one of them is a book published in 1973 by J. Allen Hynek. Now, if you know who J. Allen Hynek was, he was a consultant to the Air Force for Project Blue Book. So he worked with the Air Force for 22 years, interviewed hundreds, if not thousands, of people about UFOs. He began his journey as an open skeptic, and by the time Blue Book concluded in 1969, he became a true believer. And his book is interesting. It's written very scientifically, very statistically, I should say. It doesn't exactly flow, but more entertaining UFO books, just build it up and flow. But I am finding it interesting. And one thing that he pointed out, and the same thing David Fravor said, he pointed out that when what he thinks people saw something legitimately strange or what they perceived to be strange, they almost always started out by saying, at first, I thought it was blank. Right? They'll say, at first, when the lights were behind me in the car, I thought it was another car coming up on me, but then it lifted up or something like that. David Fravor does the same thing. He says, at first, I thought it was a helicopter, but then I noticed there was no rotor wash.
It was funny because Jim Slate in that interview, he said, at first, I thought it was, I don't think he said at first, but he said, I thought it might be a missile launched from a sub.
Those little details, learning that, for instance, I found that illuminating because coming from an expert like J. Allen Hynek, I mean, he spent the rest of his life trying to prove UFOs are real, and he really was trying to get the scientific community at large to take more interest in it. But even he acknowledges that there were a lot of cases that he thought should have been explored further. And Blue Book the Air Force guys just followed orders and they wanted to just explain away everything, right? And, so apparently he was at odds with them from time to time. Whenever he would think that a case needed to be explored further, they just, wash it off. But, the Air Force guys were there because it was an assignment. Hynek was there because he was generally curious about what UFOs were. Yeah, right. It's a pretty neat book, but we'll get more into Blue Book and the history of UFOs down the road. We've got a couple of episodes planned for some of that stuff. So, but I'm in that book right now, and I just happened to think about that one caveat of what Hynek said, of how he kind of qualified when people seemed to be legitimately witnessing something they couldn't explain.
So, as an engineer,
yeah,
I want to just take a few minutes to dissect this. I come away with it when I look at a problem in my day-to-day job as an engineer. I look at problems and I look at what information I have, and then I draw conclusions. And then I explore those conclusions and then get more data. And as I get more data, I'm able to drill down to the problems I'm having, solve those problems, and come up with a good solution. So looking at this, I look at it like this. One of two things has to be true, right? Starting off a little like tree branches. Either all of these people actually seeing something or they're not. So maybe it's either the data that we're getting is this is a real object or it is not. So you can go down either one of those branches. Which one is more likely? Well, I mean, good cases could be made for both, but I would say, given that you're seeing these things on multiple radar systems off the Nimitz, off the Princeton, and off the E-2 Hawkeye, and with eyeballs on both through the big eyes on the ship and through the pilots.
Several pilots.
It's probably a real object, right? Several pilots. I go down, it's a real object. Okay, so if this is a real object, is everybody observing the same object? Could be multiple objects. Is that more likely than it being the same object? I would say no, it's probably the same object. Does the object behave in the way that everyone's saying it behaves? Is the radar accurately depicting what this thing actually did? Well, if you assume that's the case, then I have to say that all the data, if you put it all together as one picture, it sort of paints the picture of a intelligently operated, unidentified object. If you get to that point, where you're like, okay, I'm willing to believe that point. Then you have two choices, or really three choices. One, it is an object that we have. Two, it's an object some other foreign entity has, Russia or China or somebody else. Or three, it's from not planet Earth.
Mm-hmm.
For me, more likely right now, assuming all of the information is true, I'm leaning towards it's a UFO, man. It's one of those little green man UFOs.
Well, I can tell you that, and I've heard a few people say, and I've even heard a guy that does a UFO show, say that he thinks it's going to turn out to be a top secret classified program from our own government. And I'm going to say no, mainly because, and not necessarily in this instance, but in some of the other instances that our pilots have been encountering these, there have been some very close calls where there's almost been mid-air collisions with some of these UAPs just a few years ago. In fact, there's been some changes in the military reporting system, I guess, where pilots used to be afraid to say they'd seen anything because they knew they would be ridiculed for it and that it could affect their chance of advancement within the military. But apparently that's changed now, and they're encouraging the pilots to let them know, to let their chain of command know when they haven't seen an object. So that's what I'm saying. I just don't see that as being any kind of top secret drone. I do not think our government, our military would not put anything out there that may cause harm to our pilots, lose a multi-million-dollar aircraft just for the sake of testing a classified piece of equipment. Now, another little piece that I think could be possible on the radar data, and that is, what if there's a system being tested by the Air Force that will show multiple ghost radar images?
Okay.
What if that is the case? The captain, I don't know who was in charge of the whole Nimitz group. Is that why the Air Force showed up and says, give me all your blocks, give me all your hard drives? And also they showed up very quickly. And I've heard there may or may not have been a civilian there. Well, that could have been a contractor that helped develop this system.
So this is a little interesting piece of the story we didn't get into, but there was an interview of Carson Kammerzell, who was a cryptologic technician communications officer. He viewed the Aegis system as a test program was being loaded into it, which would give you artificial tracks of various scenarios, which I thought was interesting. Essentially what they would do, they were loading up Persian Gulf training programs for the radar system. And it would give you false tracks within the radar system that they would use for training. So, you would load up this thing and they would have different tracks that would represent different type of aircraft and overlay it on the system. So that's what the other people on the Princeton would see. So it's like, oh, well, knowing software and knowing how shitty software can be sometimes, I had wondered exactly that. Is this a case where the radar tracks that they were picking up were ghost as part of this software that loaded up these false tracks for training purposes?
That the way they behaved would not have represented anything in a training video. I mean, the behavior of them, was the movement of them wouldn't be like a Russian airplane or anything like that. I mean, from 28,000 feet down to 50 feet in 3 seconds or whatever it was. I mean, if it's a training radar thing, I feel that it would mimic known aircraft.
According to Carson Kammerzell, that was exactly the point, was that this officer who had it loaded, or this seaman who had this thing loaded up and was looking at it, and he was looking over his shoulder. It was like, yeah, see, we've got these tracks that are popping up that are not supposed to be there, and I keep deleting them. They keep coming back, and they're behaving erratically and jumping around. I wonder if it was a bug in the system, something that was introduced as part of that training program that Kevin Day was
picking up. And you yourself said the Hawkeye did not pick it up on their radar, nor did the FA-18s pick it up on their radar, correct?
Well, let me clarify those. So the E2 could not pick them up immediately, but after being directed and boosting the signal or whatever they do, they were able to lock in and pick these tracks up. So they did record them.
So the chances of both systems having glitchy software pretty much nil.
Right, because the E2 Hawkeye was separate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it uses a whole different system.
A separate system. Now, it also had data link. So apparently there's a data link that goes through the whole battle group where they can share information real time. The E2 had access to both the data link information off the Princeton where these tracks were, so they could use that to hone their radar to target these tracks.
Gotcha.
Apparently.
Yeah, I mean that's for me that's the only thing I was thinking is maybe in the fact that the Air Force showed up so quickly, confiscated the radar data. I mean, what if it was some kind of classified device, like they had an aircraft up there, a stealth aircraft or something like that, and was projecting this stuff out there to fool their radar systems during this training exercise, basically trying to mimic a real world situation. And the captain was in on it, maybe his executive officer, but that's it. Like they didn't want anybody else to know about it. And really nobody's going to come in harm's way because they're not real. I mean, I think something like that is, and using the old skeptic thing, what's more likely, right? But I mean, I'm not,
You know,
I mean, I don't know, man. I mean, think about it. I mean,
now that you mention it, there was a program that was started up again based off of an earlier program, I think from the 60s, where they were utilizing, I want to say, balloons for radar spoofing to use against Russia, back in the day. I forget what the name of that project was called, but it was brought up. They started that project up again, I want to say in the 90s. That's something we should probably look into and bring back up.
we may do a follow-up
for the next episode, maybe just to do a follow-up, yeah.
I mean, I think that's totally plausible explanation. Now, it doesn't explain what David Fravor saw or anything like that, but I think it's something that could explain the anomalous radar images and the presence of the Air Force showing up and wanting the data in order to, make sure that it didn't fall into the wrong hands and it revealed this top secret program. But I mean, again, I'm kind of with you on this one. I mean, I'm interested in UFOs and all that. We'll definitely keep an eye on anything else the Pentagon comes out with. And we've got the two other videos to think about, the gimbal and the go fast. And those were recorded in much, much more recent in 2015 over the Atlantic Ocean. And I know you've done a little research on that. I say, we'll maybe follow up on those cases down the road. We have some other episodes planned. We're going to do a deep dive into the declassified history of UFOs coming up in our next episode. We're going to maybe do a 2-part on that one, maybe 3. Haven't decided yet. There's a lot of information. What we're going to try to do is start at the beginning, Kenneth Arnold sighting, and bring you to now, and basing it mostly on declassified documents that have been released from the Freedom of Information Act. So, and it does reveal an interesting story, our government's involvement in UFOs. Do I think that's the whole story that you're going to be getting? No, not by any stretch of the imagination. But what has been declassified still tells a pretty interesting story and a compelling story. And we'll throw in some sightings and some other things as well. And we'll later do deep dives into each one of those. So we have plenty of content to cover on this show.
Lots and lots of content.
So anything else you want to talk about with the Nimitz Encounter? Any last caveat, last piece there that we've left out? I don't know if I want to a lot of little details. I know
this is a big detail I just looked up, so I don't know if I want to bring it up right now or whether we'll do it in a follow-up.
Well, let's hear it. Go ahead. That's fine.
Okay. All right. Well, here you go. So that project I was talking about, the new project is called Project Nemesis, the Navy's secretive and revolutionary program to project false fleets from drone swarms. And it's got pictures of a drone here, the front of which looks like
looks like a Tic Tac.
Looks like a Tic Tac. However, it has flight control surfaces, so it does have wings, both front and tail, and it's not white. It is metallic gray.
Right, they're going to want it to be camouflaged paint-wise and radar absorbing paint and all that.
Yeah, I'm not sure they fly at 28,000 feet. It looks like they fly lower than that, but I'm not sure. And it's to give radar tracks for ships, not necessarily for flying things. But I can't imagine it would be hard to go flying or ship. I don't know. I can't imagine it'd be terribly difficult.
I mean, you can imagine for the military, if you had a program, if you're the Air Force or the Navy, and you have a program, you're getting ready to invade a country and do a bombing run. And, they've done stealth, but more than likely stealth's been around so long now that the Russians in particular have probably come up with ways to counteract that. But what if you could have your stealthy aircraft and then also project all of these false images that would have to be checked out. I mean, if you're the defending team, you're the defending Air Force, you would have to check out those radar tracks, right? So, I mean, I think that would be an extraordinarily valuable piece of software if you could somehow do that and fool the enemy's radar into thinking that there was multiple targets that actually weren't there. Again, that's just an idea that I've had, that maybe it could be something like that. I don't think the objects themselves were drones. There's been several people who come forward and say that was probably some kind of classified project. I just don't think that we would do that to our Navy pilots and also risk their lives and the hardware just to test something. I don't think that's the case. Maybe test some software, have them run around and check things out, but that's totally different. Well, anyway, I guess it's time we better wrap this thing up. We've been chatting about it for a while. Listeners, again, if you know anything, if you want to share something, we will definitely dedicate some time to it. You bring something new to it, something we've missed, we would definitely bring it on the show and share it with everyone else. And again, if you've had any personal encounters of any kind, whether it's UFOs, Bigfoot, ghosts, we don't care. Bring them to the show, share them with us. Again, no judgment on our part. We just want to hear from the community out there and know what's going on in the weird world, the real weird world, right? So let's...
the weird and wild world.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's it for this week. Anything else, Jimmy?
Yeah, so I'm going to put up for this episode in the show notes all the links that you can explore yourself to all the interviews and all of the executive summary report that was released on this, the executive report that was released on this, which is an unofficial report. We're pretty sure it came out of ATIP, and all the other videos, including 2 interviews so far that Mick West has had with Elizondo and P.J. Hughes. So a skeptic interviewing 2 of the people involved in the Nimitz encounters, directly and indirectly. And, you can, and I'll keep that updated. So you guys can just keep going back there as like a center point for you exploring all the stuff on the Nimitz encounters. And if there's something that's not on there, just hit me up in the first contact at cosmicsponge.com and let me know and I'll add it to it.
Oh, I forgot to mention, I found a report on estimating flight characteristics of anomalous unidentified aerial vehicles in the 2004 Nimitz encounter. This is a study that was done by Department of Physics, University of Albany. It's a PDF. Is that something we could, I guess, post on our page as well?
Oh, definitely. What's the name of the physicist that did that? I think I saw an interview with him. K-N-U-T-H.
Kevin Newth, Robert Powell,
yep.
And Peter, looks like Rely, maybe.
Yeah, he's actually a great guy. Really good interview I saw with him.
So just one little caveat from this. In the summary says, we consider the 2004 UAP encounters with the Nimitz Carrier Group off the coast of California and estimate lower bounds on the accelerations exhibited by the craft during the observed maneuvers. Estimated accelerations range from 75 Gs to more than 5,000 Gs with no observed air disturbance, no sonic booms, and no evidence of heat consummate with even minimal estimated energies. So that's just one little thing they said about it. It's a huge report, several pages, about 11 pages. So I'll send that to you, and then you post it.
Yeah, so the interview. Yeah, the interview with him is really good. One interesting piece that came out of that was he was like, the speed that this thing was going based on the observed drop from 28,000 feet down to 50 feet is the same speed that the New Horizon spacecraft is traveling in outer
space. Which is
space.
The fastest thing we have ever launched, and it is sailing.
In a vacuum.
Yeah. So anyway, very interesting, very, very interesting case here, the Nimitz encounters. We'll definitely be bringing more out to you, and we'll disseminate the next one. We'll try and get to the truth of the matter.
Excellent.
Check out our webpage,
Cosmic Sponge.
That's it for Steve-O.
It for Jim.
And we will see you next time.
Da-da-da.